In this video, I will answer another question that someone has sent to me, and that will be just how in the heck you can locate the footings for a deck. And even though there are a few different ways, I figured that I would start with one that I think is going to be the easiest. So let's go ahead and get started, and the first thing I want to do is just draw the lines that we're trying to find. And of course that would be the perimeter of the deck. So here we have it on a relatively flat surface. And you need to keep in mind that this isn't going to be the best method if you're on a slope or if you have some type of deformed or twisted ground, because in order for this to work it will need to be on a relatively flat surface. And the reason why I'm providing you with the outline and the picture of the deck is to provide you with a better idea of what we're doing. So we're trying to find the lines that would represent the perimeter of the decking boards, and not the beams, not the joist, just the decking boards, because this is what we're going to be able to take all of our measurements from. And hopefully that makes sense. Just simply lower the deck into the ground to create a perimeter, and of course your perimeter is probably going to be different, so keep that in mind. These numbers will be changing unless you're going to build the exact same deck. Next up on the list, we will remove the deck and the measurements, and then we will head over to the building foundation, where we will be placing two marks that will represent the width and the location of our deck. And in order for this process to work, we need to have a straight line here. So if the building foundation is not straight, then you will need to come out 6 inches or a foot and then create a straight line that you will be able to work with. And you can do that by placing a piece of lumber down on the ground or by using a string line. But either way, we need to start with a straight line, because the front of the deck is going to be parallel to whatever lines we're using here. And of course these lines can be drawn on the building foundation or on some part of the house nearest to the ground. And the reason why I'm saying that is that the measurements that we're going to be working with need to be on a level surface. You're not going to want to mark the siding about a foot up above the ground and then come down at an angle to measure any part of this process. You're going to need to be measuring off of a level surface in all directions, or at least as close to a level surface as you possibly can. Next up, we're going to place a board out 12 feet 6 inches. You can simply do this by measuring from the building foundation to the edge of the board. And of course this board will be parallel to the building foundation. Now, even though we're not going to have these marks here, we're still going to have a parallel board placed approximately where we need it to be. Now don't worry if this board is over about a foot or two. You can always adjust that later. And for those of you wondering why we might need to move the board over to the right or the left, well, it's because we're going to use the Pythagorean theorem, and that's a simple math formula: a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Now I do have another video on that. I will put a link here in the video to that video, as well as providing you with an example of how we're going to figure out the hypotenuse of a triangle with a 90-degree angle by using the measurements that we already have for our deck, 11 feet and 12 feet 6 inches. So let's go ahead and break out our trusty calculator and our pre-calculated measurements so that you can observe them. You can pause the video, take a look at them, and see if they make sense while doing your own calculations. Now the first thing I need to do is break the 12 feet 6 inches and the 11 feet into inches. And you can do this by simply grabbing a tape measure and then pulling it out to 12 foot 6 inches and seeing what's on the tape measure. Then the next step will be to multiply these numbers together. We're going to square them. So if I multiply 150 times 150, I'm going to get 22,500. 150 squared is 22,500. I will clear it, and then we will multiply 132, but I'm not going to square it this time. I'm going to multiply it by 132, and we have 17,424. Then we're simply going to add these two numbers together. So let's go ahead and add 22,500 brings us 39,924. Then we're simply going to get the square root of that number. And you can do that by pushing this button right here. And you can see that I rounded up the number from here. Since this number is above 5, I just simply rounded it up to a 1. That's where we got 199 inches, 0.81. And if I convert 0.81 to a fraction, it will end up somewhere around 13/16, which will be helpful when we're working with a tape measure. And of course, this measurement here converted to feet would be 16 feet, 7 3/16 inches. And that, my friends, is the length of this line right here that we can use to find the intersection point for our square deck platform. And that can simply be done by having somebody hold the end of the tape measure next to the mark on the foundation wall, while you come over here with the other end of the tape measure and then move it along the board until the number you're looking for lines up with the edge of the board. Then you're simply going to mark it at that point. And it doesn't get much simpler than that, because after you have this point here, you're just simply going to measure over 11 feet to mark the other spot for your deck perimeter. And now let's pan out, take a look at the measurement here. And now that we have this measurement here, we need to double check to make sure that everything is square by measuring from this point here to this point here. And if for whatever reason it's off a little bit, then you might have a problem with your square deck, and you're going to have to figure out what that might be. But don't worry about that. I've already made another video, and I will put a link to that video here. And if for whatever reason you can't figure it out, feel free to leave a comment in the comment area or email it to me, and you can get our email address at our website. Now, after you have everything squared, you can put a couple of more boards down that would represent the perimeter of the decking, and then simply measure off of that to find the locations of your footing. So not that difficult, and even if you're off a little bit, that's not going to be a big deal. And when I say a little bit, I would say within 1/2 of an inch, you're probably going to be fine. Your deck's going to look okay. And even in a situation like this, you might be able to use the beams to compensate for any problems. However, I won't be going into detail, and I don't have a video on that one yet. But you can see here where all we need to do is measure from the front of the decking back to the footing, or to the center of the post, or even to the edge of the post. Whatever we need to figure out exactly where the posts are going to be, we can do it from the inside of this little box that we have built. And of course, you're going to want to move the footings away a little bit from the edge of the concrete foundation, because the concrete footings might be in this area. Not going to be all the time, but they might be sticking out into this area, making it difficult for you to install your footing. So that will be another problem that I'm not covering in this video. But for those of you wondering why I moved it back here a little bit, that's the reason why. And of course, the deck joist will cantilever without a problem to cover this area in the back and to cover this area in the front. And with that said, you now have another tool for your tool chest to help you find any part located within or outside of the perimeter lines you can use to build a square deck.